Canadians only, Alex West Leffler. Let me introduce the wonderful Kim Dickinson. The hardworking and wise Noah Emmerich. The extremely tall and extremely talented Nnamdi Asamoah. And now the reason that I felt lucky every time I drove home from work. I felt like I had been in the company of giants. First, a fellow European, one of the best to ever do this, and one of the nicest people I ever met, Redmayne. Last but not least, a dream that came true, a dream that started when I saw Zero Dark 30. The heart and the light of this film, the actress that makes it all look so easy by working so hard, Jessica Chastain.
Thank you all so much for being here with us. We have an opportunity to have a couple of moments of conversation before the film. I think what I'd like to start with is Tobias. How did this project come to you? Was it already scripted by Christy? Or can you speak a little bit about that?
So this is the first time that I haven't written what I've directed. And I have the luxury of leaning off a steady Scottish rock, Christy. The project was brought to me by Scott Franklin. He and Producer had picked up the book, I believe, and hired Christy to do her first screenplay, right? And I was lucky enough to receive it. Reading it, I was on my way to US to do a couple of episodes on the Netflix show Mindhunter. So the subject matter was on my mind as I read this. What stood out as I read the screenplay, but also read Charles Braber's wonderful book, was that it was on the surface story about the serial killer, and underneath there was a heart and a core story about a struggling, lonely mom who stood up against the whole system and made a change. And it reminded me of the responsibility we as citizens have. So with that in mind, I engaged the first conversations with Christy, and we spent over Zoom, Copenhagen, London, a couple of years talking about this daily, weekly, until we found a way to tell this story. But it came to life in those conversations, and yeah, I appreciate them.
Any further thoughts, Christy?
I mean, when Tobias came on board, we really focused on the humanity and his truth and brought it down to, the absolute essentials, and it was such a privilege to get to adapt Charlie Braber's book and to do it with you.
Jessica, if I could ask you, sorry, I'll wait for you to stop whispering to Eddie.
Right. Ruth misbehaving.
To the back of the class. Picking up on what Tobias has said, this is very much a story about your character. And she is a nurse who works within a system that often feels like it doesn't value her at all. And yet she finds tremendous compassion within herself for all of her patients. Can you speak a little bit about how you approach this character?
Yes. Well, what was so inspiring about playing Amy is speaking to real Amy Lochran. And one of the first things she talked to me about was being a single mother. And she said she worked, don't want to get emotional, but she worked night shifts So her children would think their mom was a stay-at-home mom. So she'd like work all night and then she'd come home and sleep for a few hours, but then spend the day with her kids all at the same time when she's struggling with cardiomyopathy and needs a heart transplant. And there's a lot of codes at the hospital. So there's a lot of stress in her life. And I was so inspired by the sense of taking care of others that she had when speaking to her, and the story and the idea that she never saw anyone as a monster. She was able to see them as a human being first and use compassion to end a cycle of violence.
She is facing a lot of challenges in her life. She often feels like a hero to herself. She's on her own. Does this make her more vulnerable and open to his friendship when it's offered?
I think, yes, I think it makes her more vulnerable. I think anyone struggling with a health issue, especially something with your heart, I can't help but think that energetically that softens you a bit and makes you vulnerable. You know, her heart rate wasn't allowed to go over a certain amount of beats per minute or she could have a heart attack and die. So there's a sense of like always trying to calm down and ground yourself. But yes, it's a shocking thing that she was able to do while she was struggling with that medical issue and the emotional issue of it.
Of course. Eddie, you have spoken of your character as someone who's deeply, deeply damaged. Can be quite meaty material for an actor to explore. Was that part of what drew you to the part?
What drew me to the part was, or to the piece, was this story, this script by Christie that I read, based on Charlie's brilliant book, and it seemed to defy definition for me. It was, on the one hand, the story of an extraordinary woman who accomplished things that the systems couldn't. But it was also a story of a broken system. And but at the heart of that was humanity, both with this man who, without giving much away, but he seemed very empathetic and kind and self-deprecating, and then empathy was weaponized. I felt it defied definition, and it was unlike anything I'd read. So that's what drew me to it, along with Tobias. Jessica, because I was a dream.
Hard to beat that. Yes, absolutely. On a very practical level, Tobias, where did you shoot this?
We shot this in Stamford, Connecticut. Due to the pandemic, we weren't allowed to shoot in a real hospital. We wanted to, but we couldn't, so we rented a building and built our own hospital there. We shot it there with masks on, almost always, keeping all the rules and staying distant. But it gave us a sense at the same time, like everybody, I guess, can recognize the feeling of remembering how important other people are to you, since we couldn't be that much together. So we shot it there as a nice group of people with masks on, and drove home every day with the hope of coming back tomorrow.
Understood. Yeah. My last question is a little bit about the takeaways from all of you. You've spoken a lot about the humanity and the compassion, and that's so much. It permeates every scene of this film, every frame of it. But I will say, did the pandemic and making this film change perhaps the way you thought about medical workers and perhaps all of the healthcare systems?
Well, from my point at least, I think that it reminded us of the responsibility we carried, because we are portraying real people's lives, and not only Amy's, but all the healthcare workers out there working at hospitals. And the thing is that even if a system is broken, the people in it is not necessarily, and it reminded us that we have a responsibility to defend everybody there as human beings, and at the same time look critical at the system.
I cannot think of a better way for us to end our conversation. That's perfect. Thank you so much for being with us today.